Everyone told me to divorce my husband when he moved his disabled siblings into our home without warning. It felt like all of my future was destroyed and I got heartbroken, but there was a life-changing twist waiting for me on the same side. I had been married to my husband for 5 years. When we were dating, I knew about his younger siblings, fraternal twins in their early 20s, who had significant physical and mental challenges. They were able to feed themselves and manage basic hygiene, but their bones were fragile, their coordination weak, and their comprehension and emotional maturity were similar to that of preteens. At the time, they were cared for by a full-time team of nurses and caregivers, and they didn't live with us. Our relationship felt balanced and private, and I thought I understood what I was signing up for. Then, a few months ago, everything changed. The entire care team was fired, and my husband told me shortly afterward that he was planning to move his siblings into our home with a new team. It all happened so fast. I wasn't consulted, just informed. A week later, they were living with us, and suddenly, our home didn't feel like ours anymore. There were caregivers in every room, all day, every day. I never had space to myself. Even quiet moments disappeared. It was overwhelming. We had just reached a point in our lives where things felt settled. We were ready to start a family, and life finally felt stable. But the chaos that followed the move-in upended everything. My husband, who was already constantly working and on call as a doctor, became even more unavailable. Any chance of connection between us felt lost in the noise, literal and emotional. I felt like a bystander in my own life. When I tried to talk to him about how I was feeling, how blindsided and suffocated I felt, he got defensive. He told me I was being unsupportive and unkind. That stung because I didn't resent his siblings. I just felt like I had no voice. It was as though our shared life had been rewritten without my input. Eventually, our conversations became more strained. We even discussed divorce. He felt I lacked compassion. I felt abandoned. I couldn't believe how close we were to walking away from each other when we had once been so in sync. I was grieving the life we had planned, the family we were supposed to build, and I felt guilty for not being stronger or more selfless. I loved him. I still do. And I didn't want to walk away just because life got hard. But I was drowning. The boundaries between caregiving, marriage, and personal space had completely eroded. It was hard to imagine bringing a baby into that environment. After all that, I realized I wasn't just grieving lost plans, I was grieving the version of our life where I still had a say. Where we were still a team. I wanted to find a way to support his siblings without sacrificing our relationship in the process. But I didn't know how. About a week after everything had exploded between my husband and me, I finally felt ready to have a real conversation. I had taken some much-needed time to myself, to cry, to think, to listen to the advice I'd received and really sit with it. I realized I owed it to both of us to speak from a place of calm, not bitterness. So, when he was finally off call one evening, I asked if we could sit down and talk. Just the two of us, with no distractions, no staff coming in and out, no passive-aggressive tension hanging in the air. Just us. To my surprise, he agreed immediately. Not in a dismissive, brushing it off kind of way, but in a way that told me he'd been waiting for this conversation too. And once we started talking, everything just came pouring out. I told him, honestly but gently, that what hurt the most in this entire ordeal wasn't the chaos or the change in our lifestyle, though that was hard. It wasn't even about having his siblings move in. What truly hurt was the way it happened. The fact that I wasn't consulted, that I wasn't given the respect of being brought into such a massive decision about our shared life. It made me feel like I didn't matter in our partnership. Like I was just expected to adjust and support no matter what, without even being told what was coming. He didn't get defensive like I feared. Instead, he looked me in the eye and apologized. A real, sincere apology. He told me that, in the middle of the crisis with his siblings and the fallout with their previous care team, he hadn't been thinking clearly. All his energy, all his panic, had gone into making sure they were safe and stabilized. And while I could understand that now, it didn't make the hurt disappear. But hearing him acknowledge that, really acknowledge it, meant more than I can put into words. Then came the part one wasn't ready for. He told me there was something he needed to be honest about. He hesitated before saying it, clearly bracing for impact. And then, quietly but firmly, he said, "I love you more than anything, but I love them more. I have to put them first, always." I can't explain the feeling those words gave me. Like something cracked open inside me and went quiet all at once. I sat there for a moment, trying to process what that really meant. Not because I didn't understand, believe me, I did, but because I hadn't wanted to believe that my place in his life might always come second. He explained that what happened with the previous care team shook him to his core. That he felt like he almost failed them, like he came too close to repeating the kind of neglect they'd already survived once. He said the cameras, the live-in staff, the sudden decisions, everything, had been done out of fear and trauma. He needed to know they'd be safe, even if it meant appending everything else. And it was in that moment that something shifted for me. I realized I had been so wrapped up in my own feelings of loss, of our stolen privacy, our postponed plans, the invisible erasure of our normal marriage, that I had failed to fully see his side. I knew what his childhood had been like. I knew about the abuse, the neglect, the way he, as a literal child himself, had stepped into the role of caregiver for his siblings because no one else would. I had heard the stories before. But I hadn't really felt what that must have done to him, not until I saw him in front of me that night, tired, broken, scared. I felt awful. Because I loved him. I still do. And I realized I had not been there for him in the way he needed me to be. I had focused on the logistics, on what was fair or not fair, and lost sight of the human being I married. He had been reliving a trauma, and I had been focused on our dinner table being crowded and our plans getting delayed. That said, it didn't magically erase all my pain. I still missed what we had. I still mourned the life we were building. But I also understood now that loving someone sometimes means being willing to meet them in their worst moments, not just their best. He hadn't stopped being a husband, he had just been forced, by circumstance and past wounds, to become a guardian again in ways that scared him. As far as our future plans went, we had agreed that we would wait a few years, 3 at most, before making any final decision about whether or not we wanted to have a child. We were both somewhat undecided at the time, floating in that in-between space where the idea of parenthood felt both distant and strangely magnetic. But somewhere along the way, I began to realize I was falling more deeply in love with the idea of motherhood than I had initially expected. I started noticing little things, how I felt when I saw a parent gently holding their child's hand or how my heart tugged when I imagined hearing tiny footsteps echoing through our home. It wasn't something I rushed to admit, not even to myself at first, but the feeling grew steadily, quietly, like a seed beginning to root. In the midst of that slow realization, my husband surprised me in a different way. When I brought up the lack of boundaries and how overwhelmed I felt with his siblings and their care team living with us, he didn't dismiss me or get defensive. He truly listened. He was incredibly receptive to my concerns and agreed to set up designated areas in the house, spaces that were strictly staff only and me only. It might sound like a small thing to someone on the outside, but to me, it meant the world. It meant I could breathe again. Those spaces became tiny sanctuaries of peace where I could retreat and feel a little more like myself. We still had more to implement, more changes to make, but that first step made a real difference. It helped me feel seen. And finally, I came to accept that some people might see my choice as foolish. To stay in a marriage where things had gotten messy, where big decisions were made without my input. But now, I knew everything. I knew where he stood, what his intentions were, and what I could realistically expect. Now, 2 years later, I find myself reflecting more deeply than ever on the path I've chosen. I've always been a bit of a fence-sitter when it came to having children. Throughout my life, I've gone through phases of certainty, moments when I was sure I wanted children, only for that certainty to dissolve into hesitation. At times, I'd even sway in the opposite direction, thinking perhaps motherhood just wasn't meant for me. I envied women who always seemed so sure of their purpose. Their confidence, their clarity, it felt like a secret I hadn't been let in on. But marriage has a way of making you reevaluate everything. I married my husband 7 years ago, and to this day, it remains the happiest decision I've ever made. He's a brilliant and well-respected doctor. Beyond his success, though, he's kind, grounded, and selfless, a man whose heart is just as big as his intellect. I am deeply, irrevocably in love with him. His job, while demanding, provides us with financial stability and also allows me the freedom to stay at home, explore my interests, and build a life that suits us both. I've dabbled in online work and creative hobbies, but ultimately, I enjoy being a stay-at-home wife. However, one reality I had to accept when I married him is his unshakable commitment to his younger siblings. They are twins, a boy and a girl, now in their mid-20s. But they've never had the chance to live as adults. Due to severe abuse and neglect from their biological parents, they were left permanently disabled, physically underdeveloped, with brittle bones and fragile bodies, and mentally around the developmental age of 12 or 13. Bright in their own way, yes, and full of life, but they need full-time care, supervision, and assistance. My husband has been their legal guardian since he was only 18. But the truth is, he's been their parent for much longer than that. He fed them when no one else would, carried them upstairs, kept them alive through sheer willpower. When I met him, that part of his life was managed through a professional team of caregivers. They didn't live with him, with us. They had their own space, and we had ours. Our lives could intertwine without overwhelming each other. But then, things changed. The caregivers were let go. It's still unclear if that was due to budget, conflict, or something else, and without much warning, my husband moved the twins into our home. Along with them came a new team of aides and nurses. Our home, once our sanctuary, became full, always buzzing with staff, schedules, and the gentle chaos of caregiving. At first, I was blindsided. I had no real say. No vote. No chance to prepare emotionally or mentally. I felt robbed of my privacy and my voice in our marriage. It was as if our plans, the ones we whispered about late at night, the ones we sketched out in the quiet, had vanished. We were supposed to be starting a family of our own. I was just beginning to fall in love with the idea of motherhood. It was subtle, gradual, not some thunderclap revelation, but it was real. I had imagined what our child might look like, how he would hold them, how I would decorate a nursery. But when the twins came to live with us, everything paused. Not ended. Paused. That distinction matters, though some days, it's hard to remember. After some time, we sat down and had one of the most raw, honest conversations we've ever had. I laid everything bare, the resentment, the guilt, the sense of betrayal, the grief for a future I felt was slipping away. He listened. Really listened. And to his credit, he took steps. We created designated, staff-only areas in the house, and I was given my own personal space again. Privacy, even in small forms, started to return. We agreed to revisit the baby conversation in 3 years. Not forever. Just time to adapt. Also about 3 years ago, my husband and I were standing at a crucial turning point in our marriage. I was 32, nearing 35, an age when I couldn't ignore the lingering worry, am I too late to have children? It was a thought that tugged at me more every day. We had never been sure if we wanted to be parents, hovering in that, maybe someday, zone. Then, like a whisper from the universe, a close friend gave birth. Holding that newborn, I felt a surge of something I couldn't name, love, awe, longing. In that beautiful, tiny life, I sensed a reflection of a path I might actually walk. That's when I knew, I want to be a mother. We started to make plans. We talked about the future, about space, timing, readiness. We dreamt about a nursery and imagined weekends of family walks. Then everything shattered. His twin siblings, now in their mid-20s but with the physical fragility and emotional maturity of adolescence, had been living under professional care since I first met them. They needed near-constant supervision due to brittle bone disease and developmental delays. My husband had been their guardian since he was a teenager, but their care had always happened outside our home. Until it didn't. One evening, he came home with the weight of the world in his eyes. The care team had been accused of abuse. It was an emergency. They were unsafe. Without discussion, he moved them and their new care staff into our house. In a week, our private world exploded. The constant presence of caregivers. $100 medical supplies suddenly appearing everywhere. Scheduled visits, professional instructions, all of it. I felt my home dissolve and with it, the future I'd begun to embrace. In my panic, I turned to the one place I could speak without filters, an online forum. I unloaded raw, painful clarity. It felt like my life had been stolen. I wrote about feeling betrayed, erased, forgotten. I didn't share the whole backstory, I couldn't. It was too private, too painful. But I laid bare my grief and confusion. I expected empathy but found judgment. That post opened a floodgate of cruel feedback. "You idiot, you selfish fool, get out now," the words hit me like stones. Some attacked me for wanting a family. Others hurled slurs at my husband, and worst of all, toward his vulnerable siblings. They didn't know our story, they only saw a trigger word, couple having trouble because of caregiving. They blamed me for not running away. They dismissed love, loyalty, history, mental illness, trauma. It was brutal and heartless. But that moment of vulnerability also forced me to dig deeper. I realized I'd also been unready, emotionally blocked, resisting understanding until my grief was louder than my curiosity. I hadn't known my husband's truth quite that deeply. I hadn't fully grasped the decades of fear, responsibility, trauma, and parental love he carried. The twins were not just problems to solve. They were living proof of his humanity, his loyalty, his strength. He apologized. Repeatedly. He explained the night terrors he'd experienced as a teenager, the guilt of leaving them alone, of surviving when they couldn't. He talked about how he felt choked by rage and fear when he learned of the neglect. He told me it wasn't malicious, it was reactive. He didn't want conversation, he wanted action. He thought he was protecting his family. And in that moment, his family had included both his siblings and the partner he spent every day promising to love and cherish. After the initial shock, we had the hardest conversation we've ever had. I told him about my dreams, of being a mother, of starting our family together. I said how it felt like those dreams were yanked from me. He listened, tears in his eyes, and asked how we could begin again. So we did. We rebuilt. Slowly. With intention. We created real boundaries. Staff-only zones. My retreat place, a desk, a closet, a corner of the living room where I could write and breathe and be alone. He protected that space. He made it non-negotiable. He offered it before I even asked. The relief I felt was profound. We made a deal about timing. No babies for 2 or 3 years, at the latest. I needed to see if I could hold both love for my husband and compassion for his siblings. If I could share our life again. If I could heal from loss and adapt to a new definition of home. We also made a commitment: if a baby ever came, I would always come first. That didn't mean letting go of his siblings, it meant including them in our vision, not sacrificing me to a system. We'd want a home that could accommodate all of us someday. But not at the cost of silence or loneliness for me. Looking back now, I'm proud, not because it was easy, but because I chose love and growth over leaving. I chose to confront my grief instead of letting it harden. I chose to see his pain, to hold it with my own. I chose to believe love can expand, not just break. 3 years later, I'm no longer afraid of the ticking clock. My yearning for a baby hasn't disappeared, it's softened, matured, integrated into a fuller life I didn't expect. I've become a stepsister, a guardian, and a mentor to 2 souls I didn't choose to raise but now cherish. I've learned that caregiving doesn't have to be a prison. It can be a place of unexpected belonging. This had taken a real toll on our marriage, but we both still believed it was worth fighting for. What became clear was that I hadn't been completely honest with myself. Before all of this happened, I knew my husband had twin siblings with special needs, that he was their legal guardian, and that he loved them deeply. He'd told me as much when we were dating, but I'd heard it more like background information, not something that would define our life together. I thought the plan to care for them in a separate house was temporary, due to some unspecified situation. I didn't really question how long temporary might last, or what it would mean for my dreams and our marriage. Then, suddenly, that moment came when everything changed. The care team was let go, and he moved them into our home without any real discussion. I was blindsided. I didn't just lose quiet space and privacy, I felt like I lost the future we'd been building. I found myself posting, desperate, vulnerable, and confused, and as I mentioned, the reaction from anonymous strangers online was brutal. I was called names, told I had no self-respect, accused of being cold, shallow, ungrateful, and worse. And so many assumed our marriage was doomed or that my husband was selfish or abusive. It was only later, after honest reflection, talking to my counselor, and reading comments from thoughtful strangers, that something shifted. One commenter pointed out, gently but firmly, "You married a man with children already, and you didn't fully grasp that until they moved in." And I realized how true that was. I had walked into marriage under one set of assumptions, but he had entered into it already anchored in love, responsibility, and guardianship. He hadn't lied. He had told me everything, if I had listened, really heard. And I couldn't blame him for stepping in to protect the twins. When I confronted him, post-move, with tears and hurt, he told me straight, "They're my children first, and I would never betray them." He didn't mention me, as though it was companionable truth, not contradiction. And though it hurt, I saw him in that moment, clearer than I ever had before. That night, I saw a version of love I hadn't expected, not only love for me, but a fierce, unwavering love for his siblings. A love that sometimes demanded a reordering of life. And the realization changed my lens. I began to open my mind. Over the next few months, we began rebuilding. We went to marriage counseling, though his hospital shifts made scheduling nearly impossible. We talked until we cried, until we laughed. We planned small vacations together, and even a few family trips that included the twins and their caregivers. We found our footing again. We reclaimed our marriage, too. Date nights emerged from the chaos, stolen moments together in the evenings, private whispers over tea. Those moments were small, but enough. As time passed, my longing to have a baby began to fade, not because I no longer loved that idea, but because I felt full in a different way. My husband's love for me and for his siblings showed me something deeper. Family could take many forms. I didn't have to lose myself to prove loyalty, and neither did he. We were learning to coexist, with grace, with laughter, with awkwardness, and with boundaries. Around the house, I carved out my places. A bookshelf that was mine, notebooks, books, candles that meant something small only to me. Then a drawer in the kitchen labeled me, where I kept snacks others weren't supposed to touch, or my favorite cups. After a few months, I felt those spaces were healing me, like adding air back to my lungs. And I began connecting with the twins. I started small, with breakfast, kneeling next to them as they chattered about cartoons or yellows or music. We did puzzles. I learned how to hold their fragile hands when we walked in the yard. I listened when they talked about their father, full of childish glee. They would say, "Mommy," and I would catch my heart, then let it soften instead of recoiling. Being around them felt good. Belonging, in a new sense of the word. I started to feel like family, rather than an outsider with expectations. And my husband and I noticed. We grew closer in new ways, too. We still made time for each other. We still date night. We still found joy in quiet evenings. We fought less bitterly, and more carefully when we did fight. I never thought this could happen. I never believed it was possible to love someone's adult but still childlike twins as deeply and as maternally as I eventually did. But here I am, reflecting on how my heart opened to them and realizing I no longer want, or even need, biological children of my own. For years, I hovered in indecision. I had drifted through my 20s and early 30s with no firm sense of purpose. Even after marrying my husband, I didn't feel settled. I wondered, did I even want kids? Or did I just feel like I should want them because that's what people do by a certain age? My counselor once asked me, gently but firmly, "Do you really want children, or are you seeking purpose?" That question stuck with me, more sharply than any physical clock could. Then the twins moved in. At first, I was angry, confused, lost. Their presence upended our quiet life and threatened everything I thought I wanted. But as days turned into weeks, something unexpected happened. I found myself drawn to them, not because I had to be, but because my heart chose them. I learned what brittle bones felt like, how fragile their bodies were. I saw how their minds paused at adolescent thoughts, even though their faces wore adult features. I learned to kneel beside them, to comb their hair, to listen when they pointed at a cartoon or hummed a tune. We read children's books together, board books, picture books, the kind of simple, safe stories that fit their developmental place. I would run my finger over the page as they watched the illustrations, their heads tilted back to see me, trust spilling from their eyes. I wrapped my arms around them when they were scared or tired, and warmed my soul in the glow of their vulnerability. Something inside me shifted. The ache for motherhood, once loud and confusing, softened into something new, a quiet certainty that these two mattered. They needed me, and I needed them. Not because I owed them anything, but because I chose them. It felt like love, like purpose, like home. It was hard to admit at first, even to myself. Could I really love older children that weren't my spouse's biological children? A little voice, pride, perhaps, mocked me. It's an easy substitute. A consolation prize. But that voice was wrong. The love I felt wasn't substitute, it was real. It grew in patient stages, like vines climbing into cracks in the concrete until something alive and green breaks through. In time, I found new passion in life, disability awareness, trauma recovery, child advocacy, not in some abstract sense, but rooted in personal living, every day in our home. I volunteered at local foundations. I began drafting a manuscript for a children's story, inspired by the twins, full of wonder, of care, of gentle strength. I remembered that I once dreamed of becoming a children's book author, but had shelved it in my teens. Now that once-forgotten dream rekindled itself. My husband and I grew closer through this too. The shared responsibility brought us together in ways nothing else had. We co-parented without judging, loving without constraint. He told me more of their history, stories of trauma, bravery, fragility. I grew to understand not only them, but his deep, sometimes desperate, part of his soul that had been protecting them for decades. It wasn't a plan. It wasn't emotional manipulation. It was just life stepping in when we needed it most. I understand the cynics, the voices inside my head who chuckle and say, "You've been manipulated into loving them, so you'll stay." But those voices don't know the tears we've shed during their meltdowns, the quiet smiles at their mornings, the breakthrough of a new word, mama. Yes, I know they're not my biological children, and yes, they have professional staff, cameras, routines. But nothing in this life is one-dimensional. None of it is incidental. Now, after all this time, I feel something profound and quiet. I don't think I want, nor even need, biological children. My heart has found enough meaning in these two souls who needed belonging, safety, and love. And in turn, they gave me the magnitude of purpose I'd been searching for. I am happy. My life feels real, full of love, possibility, creativity, compassion, and yes, purpose. The clock on motherhood no longer ticks inside me. I missed nothing. I traded expectation for authenticity, biological definitions for chosen family. It's messy, expansive, imperfect, and beautiful. And I know now that to live this life fully is enough. This is for the woman I used to be, the one who posted here in panic and grief when her life didn't go according to plan. And maybe, it's for someone else out there too, someone staring down a choice that feels impossible, and wondering if peace, happiness, or meaning still exist on the other side of it. I was furious. I was grieving. I was terrified. I came here to vent, hoping someone could understand the shock and betrayal I felt. But the internet, especially a place like this, can be a harsh mirror. Some responses were thoughtful. Others were scathing. I was called names, idiot, doormat, delusional. Many told me my husband was manipulative, that I had no self-respect, and that I'd regret staying. That I was throwing my life away for someone else's burden. That I was a fool for not packing up and leaving immediately. But life moved on. And as much as I thought I'd been trapped in a nightmare, something unexpected started to happen. I adapted. Slowly. Painfully. But it happened. At first, I just focused on survival. I reasserted some boundaries, re-established some privacy within our home. My husband apologized, sincerely. He explained the trauma response, the fear, the instinct to protect the only family he had left when their care team was suddenly fired after a situation of criminal negligence. But what I really want to talk about is what I never expected. I started to fall in love with the twins, not as burdens or obstacles, but as people. In a maternal way, even. I feel strange admitting that, because it sounds like a Hallmark turnaround, and life is rarely that clean. But it happened gradually, in the mundane, helping tie shoes, reading bedtime stories, sitting beside them while they smiled at cartoons. They are developmentally like middle schoolers, curious, funny, emotional, and utterly endearing. And I found myself wanting to care for them, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I used to believe motherhood could only exist in one form: pregnancy, birth, a biological child. But love doesn't know those limits. I've come to see motherhood, purpose, and love in so many new shapes. A mutual friend adopted 2 older children, ages 12 and 7, and I watched her life blossom in a way that had nothing to do with bottles or baby showers. I saw love in tantrums and field trips, in therapy sessions and first school dances. It opened my eyes. And my husband? We're stronger than we've ever been. Not because everything's been easy, but because we chose to work through the hard. We have cameras installed in the areas where the twins and caregivers spend the most time, not because we don't trust them, but because he still carries the trauma of what happened to them before. We talk openly, even about the ugly stuff. We've grieved the life we didn't get to have. But we've built something beautiful in its place. I haven't thought seriously about having biological children in over a year now. The urgency just dissolved. It didn't feel like giving up. It felt like clarity. That constant inner debate of, do I want this? Or do I think I'm supposed to want this, went quiet. I feel peaceful in a way I never imagined. I just want to be with my husband. With the twins. With the little world we've built out of chaos, missteps, healing, and love. I want to finish my books, host silly birthday parties, go on beach vacations with too many accessibility bags, and fall asleep knowing I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. So thank you, if you came this far. Whatever path you take, make sure it's your choice. Your life. Your purpose. Don't let fear or shame make the call for you. I'm glad I didn't.